Autumn 1944. A rain-soaked road near Nancy, eastern France. Altitude, NA. The air hung heavy and cold, a mix of diesel fumes and damp earth. For the veteran crews of the German panzer divisions, the Western Front was a meat grinder, but at least they faced familiar devils. The slow, lumbering American Shermans, they knew their enemy. They respected their enemy. What they did not know was that the ground beneath their treads was about to rumble with a new, terrifying sound, a sound of almost impossible speed and devastating precision. This was the noise of the M18 gun motor carriage, the Hellcat. In the early stages of the war, the prevailing strategy on both sides was based on armor thickness. The bigger, the better. Heavy armor equaled survival. The American tank doctrine, however, began to splinter. While the M4 Sherman was reliable, a faction within the U.S. Army Ordnance believed that the true answer to the overwhelming German Panther and Tiger tanks was speed. Their logic was audacious. Why build slow, heavy tanks to take a hit when you could build a vehicle fast enough to avoid being hit entirely? The Japanese military, fighting primarily in the Pacific, had arrived at a similar conclusion, but through a different lens: necessity. Their Type 95 Heigo and Type 97 Chiha were light, agile, and maneuverable, perfect for jungle warfare and island defense, where logistical supply was paramount. But compared to the massive steel beasts of the European theater, their armor was little more than a shield against rifle fire. A common Japanese saying among the tank crews was, "Better to be quick than dead." But quickness, they would soon learn, had its limits when faced with specialized tank destroyers. Quote, alleged report from a captured Japanese tanker, 1943. Our Type 97 is a dancer. It moves where the American iron cannot follow. Their crews are slow, they think in straight lines. We know the jungle, we know the shadows. Their great shells pass where we were, not where we are. This confidence was rooted in successes against poorly armored opponents and terrain that neutered heavy machinery. It was a confidence that, when measured against the European reality, bordered on hubris. Across the world, the Americans were finalizing the antidote to the Panzer threat. The M18 Hellcat was born from an uncompromised design mandate: speed above all else. It was to be the fastest tracked armored vehicle of the war. To achieve this, engineers made ruthless sacrifices. Its armor was paper-thin, only half an inch thick in most places. A direct hit from almost any German tank shell meant instant obliteration. It was a glass cannon, but the Hellcat possessed three game-changing elements. 1. The engine, a Continental R975 radial engine, initially designed for aircraft, giving it an official road speed of 55 mph, 88 km/h, a speed unheard of for armored vehicles. 2. The turret, a new, lightweight, and most importantly, fully rotating open-top turret. 3. The gun, the devastating 76mm M1A1 cannon. This high-velocity gun could pierce the side armor of a Panther at tactical ranges. When the first units arrived in Europe in the summer of 1944, they were initially met with derision. Sherman crews, hardened by months of fighting, scoffed at the thin armor and open top. They called it a suicide box or the coffin on wheels. The irony was staggering. The machine designed to counter the German heavy tanks was viewed by its own side as an object of contempt. Quote, Captain Robert S., 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, October 1944. We saw the first Hellcats roll in. Open top, half-inch of steel. We thought, these guys are crazy. Or they were giving up the only thing that kept you alive: armor. We didn't understand yet. They weren't meant to take a punch. They were meant to deliver the killing blow and disappear before the enemy could even track them. The stage was set for a dramatic reversal of perception. The machine, dismissed as too fragile, would soon forge a terrifying reputation based on a simple, ruthless tactical principle: hit, run, and live to hit again. The story of the M18 is a classic paradox of military design. A weapon so vulnerable, it forced its crews to adopt tactics of lethal aggression. The Japanese, with their own belief in speed, would have instinctively understood this ethos. Yet their Type 97's speed was built for movement. The Hellcats was built for murder. The difference in engine power and armament between the two light approaches was the distance between life and death. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the technology and tactics of World War II, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue to bring these untold stories of human courage and military engineering to light. Now, let's return to the battlefield, late 1944, tank-proving grounds and the logistical nightmare of the Western Front. The core of the conflict was not simply courage, but kinetics. The physics of the battlefield determined victory, and in the case of the M18 Hellcat, its performance transcended traditional armored warfare. To truly appreciate its impact, we must look beyond the emotional accounts and examine the raw specifications that made this vehicle a revolutionary, if terrifying, departure from tradition. The M18 Hellcat weighed only 18 tons, half the weight of the German Panther. This was its strength and its weakness. The vehicle's incredible speed was not just for quick retreats, it was an integral part of its offensive doctrine. The tank destroyer TD concept was built around the ambush. TDs were not meant to slug it out face to face. They were deployed in support of infantry and positioned along expected enemy advance routes. The Hellcat elevated this concept to an art form. Tactical advantage, the flank. A typical German Panther tank had front armor approaching 80 mm. The Hellcat's 76 mm M1A1 AP round, even at 1,000 yards, would struggle to penetrate. However, the side and rear armor of the Panther were drastically thinner, often only 30 to 45 mm. The Hellcat's speed allowed its crew to execute the shoot and scoot tactic. 1. Detection. Identify the enemy heavy armor. 2. Maneuver. Use the 55 mph speed to rapidly relocate to the enemy's flank, often using roads or open fields considered impassable for heavier vehicles. 3. Ambush. Deliver a high-velocity 76 mm shell into the thinner side or engine compartment. 4. Escape. Before the slower German tank could traverse its heavy turret, a process that took a precious 10 to 15 seconds, the Hellcat was already gone, relocating to a new position, sometimes hundreds of yards away, to strike again or escape entirely. The engine, the Continental R975, had a power-to-weight ratio of approximately 23, 8 tons. By contrast, the German Panther, with its powerful Maybach engine, managed only 15, 4 ton. This difference translated into the ability to dictate the engagement. The Hellcat crews lived by the creed, "Mobility is protection." While the Hellcat was light by choice, the Japanese tanks were light by necessity. The Type 97 Chiha, the standard medium tank of the Imperial Japanese Army, IJA, weighed around 15 tons, comparable to the Hellcat. But here the similarities ended. The Chiha's engine, a 170 HP diesel, yielded a power-to-weight ratio of about 11, 3 ton, half that of the Hellcat. Its top speed was a respectable 24 mph, 38 km/h. More critically, its main armament was a 57 mm Type 97 gun, designed primarily to support infantry, firing low-velocity, high-explosive HE shells. The armor-piercing capabilities were negligible against even the early American Shermans, let alone the specialized armor of the European theater. Quote, Engineer, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, circa 1941. The needs of the Empire demand a tank that can be transported across water and through jungle trails. Our gun is sufficient for the enemy's bunkers. Heavy armor is a burden that sinks the ship and slows the advance. We do not need to fight tank to tank. We must rely on surprise and infantry cooperation. The mindset was fundamentally different. The Japanese saw the tank as mobile artillery. The Americans designed the Hellcat purely as a tank killer. The German tankers, and hypothetically the Japanese veterans who understood the importance of industrial capacity, would have been deeply disturbed by the sheer scale of the American war machine. M18 Hellcat production, over 2,500 units were produced by Buick alone, ensuring that for every loss, 2 more could quickly be sent to the front. Ammunition. American industry poured out millions of rounds of high-velocity 76 mm ammunition. For the Axis powers, especially Japan, every tank loss was almost irreplaceable. This industrial imbalance meant that the American crew could afford to take tactical risks that were simply unthinkable for their opponents. They had the machines, the fuel, and the shells to maintain a relentless, high-speed pace of operations. The M18 was the industrial answer to the German heavy armor problem, not a bigger hammer, but a faster, harder punch. The Japanese light tank philosophy, while tactically sound in the jungle, would have been immediately nullified in the open fields of Europe. The Hellcat was not just a vehicle, it was the physical embodiment of the overwhelming industrial capacity and technological edge that defined the late war. Winter, 1944-1945. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The true drama of the war often resided in the moment. The enemy's perception shifted from confidence to terror. For the veteran German tankers, the shift came with the knowledge that the Americans now had a weapon capable of targeting their weak points, a weapon they could not catch. To truly understand the theme of being outmatched, we must project the mindset of the Japanese tanker, a man already accustomed to fighting a technologically superior foe, onto the European battlefield. Imagine a veteran Japanese tanker, Lieutenant Sato, accustomed to the low-speed close-quarters combat of Guadalcanal. His Type 97 Chiha, a reliable machine in the mud, is now facing the vast, cold landscape of the Western Front. He has read the intelligence reports often delayed, always optimistic, about the American light armor. Internal monologue, Lieutenant Sato, composite based on IJA tanker diaries. They said their tanks were slow, like tortoises. We were told to use our agility, to fire at the tracks to avoid the front. But the sound is wrong. It is too high, too fast. It is not the rumble of a Sherman. It is a whine, a piercing shriek that arrives before the shell does. What demon engine moves that quickly on the earth? The psychological effect of the M18's speed was as potent as its shell. The Germans nicknamed it the hit-and-run devil, Schlag- und Lauf-Teufel. Tankers are trained to calculate firing solutions based on the enemy's predicted rate of traverse and speed. The Hellcat shattered these calculations. Its ability to appear, fire a killing shot, and vanish from sight in under 20 seconds created an atmosphere of paranoia. The open-top turret, initially the cause of the Hellcat's derision, became a crucial asset. It allowed the crew, especially the commander, an unparalleled situational awareness. They could spot targets, observe the impact of their fire, and direct the driver for the high-speed relocation maneuver instantly, without the blindness imposed by armor plate. For the Japanese, whose tanks featured often poor optics and tight, hot interiors, this difference in visibility was another layer of technological disparity. Their strength was their stealth and close-range ambush. The Hellcat's strength was a high-speed, long-range ambush that their own technology could not predict or counter. Quote, Corporal Hans Müller, German Panzer IV crewman, Winter, 1944. The Shermans came in a line, predictable. You knew where they would be. The Hellcat, it was a ghost. You would see the flash, then the impact on the flank of your comrade. You traverse the gun, nothing, gone. Then you see the smoke a kilometer away, and you know it has fired again. We were fighting something that did not play by the rules of armor. It was frustrating. It was terrifying. The theme of Outmatched comes into sharp focus when considering the cost of engagement. A Hellcat crew facing a heavy German tank knew they had one or two chances to hit the flank before the German realized the danger. The stakes were high, but the potential reward, the destruction of a heavy tank, was worth the risk. For a Japanese-style light tank crew, facing a Hellcat would be an exercise in futility. Firepower matchup. The Hellcat's 76mm AP shell would pass clean through the 25mm frontal armor of the Chiha as if it were cardboard, often exiting the other side. A hit anywhere was catastrophic. Speed disparity. The 55 M18 Hellcat could simply outrun and outmaneuver the 24mm Chiha, choosing the exact range and angle for the killing blow. The Japanese tank philosophy, centered on the mobility of the Type 97, was ironically defeated by a machine that was twice as mobile and 10 times as lethal. The initial laughter and scorn about American light tanks would have rapidly transformed into a cold, debilitating terror. The true mystery of the Hellcat was its ability to turn the table. It forced the enemy to fight a defensive war, always looking over their shoulder, never knowing where the high-velocity punch would land next. The lesson was brutal. In modern warfare, speed is only a virtue if it is paired with overwhelming firepower. The Hellcat had both. The Type 97 had only one. January 1945. The final brutal phases of the Battle of the Bulge, hypothetical action. The strategic moment that vindicated the Hellcat doctrine came during the desperate German counteroffensives. These battles were not just about territory. They were a final decisive clash of military philosophies. The success of the Hellcat was cemented in places like the frozen hell of the Ardennes, particularly around Bastogne. Here, the heavily armed American infantry needed the tank destroyers to prevent the massive German columns from breaking through. The Hellcats of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion became legendary. The German panzers were forced onto roads due to the terrain, creating long, vulnerable columns. This was the perfect scenario for the M18. The Hellcat Blitzkrieg, a common tactic, involved a pincer run. Two Hellcats would race ahead of the German column, cutting across an open field. One would engage the lead German tank, forcing the column to halt. The second Hellcat, using its superior speed, would race down the length of the column, delivering a rapid series of shots into the soft side armor and engine decks of the immobilized vehicles. Quote, Sergeant Alex T., gunner, M18 Hellcat, 705th TDBN. We were a surgical knife. The Shermans were the shield. We were the scalpel. We would see a king tiger on the road, big and slow. The driver would push the throttle, engine roaring. You felt like you were flying. You had maybe 5 seconds from the moment you saw the side of that thing to the moment you pulled the trigger and screamed, "Move!" If we stayed for a second longer, we were dead. But in those 5 seconds, we did more damage than an entire company of slower tanks. The M18 Hellcat was statistically one of the most effective tank killers of the war. Its doctrine, speed and firepower over armor, proved correct against the heaviest armor the Wehrmacht could field. Kill ratio. The M18 battalions achieved a remarkable kill-to-loss ratio that often exceeded the performance of the M4 Sherman units. For every Hellcat lost in combat, the units were credited with destroying multiple German tanks. Adaptation. The open top, initially a flaw, allowed the crew to quickly adapt to the freezing conditions, often throwing tarps over the compartment while maintaining superior visibility against the white winter landscape. The Hellcat's success fundamentally changed the German approach. They were forced to adopt heavier infantry screens, deploy more dedicated anti-tank guns in depth, and rely less on long, high-speed thrusts. The era of the unstoppable, heavily armored spearhead was ending. The dramatic arc of the Hellcat serves as a perfect strategic lesson for the Japanese tankers facing overwhelming American production in the Pacific. The lesson was not simply, America builds good tanks. The lesson was, specialization beats generalization. The Chiha was a general-purpose tank. The Hellcat was a specialized, ruthless killer. When the two concepts are placed side by side, the fate is sealed by mathematics. If a Type 97 crew had encountered an M18, their 57mm low-velocity gun would have done nothing to the Hellcat's hull, and the Hellcat could have tracked and destroyed the Chiha at any range, choosing the time and place of the engagement. Irony. The most successful Japanese tank strategy in the Pacific was not to engage US armor, but to bury their tanks and use them as static pillboxes. They had, in essence, conceded the battle of mobility, the very quality they initially prided themselves on. They were outmatched not just in numbers, but in the velocity of war. The Hellcat was the apotheosis of high-risk, high-reward warfare. It required fearless, highly trained crews who embraced the terror of their thin armor and transformed it into a weapon of lethal audacity. Their triumph was a victory of technical innovation and uncompromising tactical doctrine, post-war 1946 and beyond. Military academies and the drawing boards of the Cold War. The echo of the M18 Hellcat's engine did not fade with the cessation of hostilities. Its legacy fundamentally altered the future of armored warfare, proving that the old rules of thick armor were no longer universally applicable. The story of the Hellcat is the story of how a suicide box redefined the meaning of tank protection. The Hellcat officially ended its service with a stunning combat record, but its influence was only beginning. The principles it established, high mobility, high velocity firepower, and low profile, would be inherited by future generations of armored fighting vehicles. 1. The end of the tank destroyer. Ironically, The M18's success contributed to the end of the dedicated tank destroyer corps. The US Army realized that if a vehicle could be made that fast and that lethal, it should simply be classified as a tank. This philosophy led directly to the development of the high-speed, high-mobility tanks of the Cold War era. 2. Mobility as armor. The Hellcat proved that active defense, avoiding the hit, could be more effective than passive defense, absorbing the hit. This concept would be revisited time and again, particularly in the rapid evolution of modern mechanized infantry and highly mobile artillery. Quote, General Staff Lecture, U.S. Army War College, 1955. The M18 Hellcat showed us that we were asking the wrong question. We asked, how much armor do we need to survive? The Hellcat crews asked, how fast do we need to be to make the enemy miss? The correct answer, as proven in the Ardennes, was that speed is not a secondary attribute. Speed is an offensive weapon. It is the ability to choose the battle. For the Japanese tankers, their fate was sealed by a technological path dependency. Their light, agile tanks were brilliant for the tactical environment they were designed for, but they lacked the necessary industrial base and engineering freedom to adapt. The Hellcat was not just a better tank destroyer, it was a symbol of a paradigm shift in military engineering. Had a Chiha engaged a Hellcat, the Japanese crew would have experienced a terrifying realization that their machine, which they relied upon for speed and maneuverability, was utterly outclassed in both categories by a design that was itself considered vulnerable. The irony of being outmatched by a light enemy was the final crushing blow. The true heroes of this story are the crews. They were the ones who had to wrestle with the paradox of their vehicle. Every Hellcat crewman was an embodiment of controlled risk. They had to be expert gunners, but even better drivers and commanders. They knew their lives were balanced on the razor's edge of their speed dial. Their job was not to hold the line, but to shatter the enemy's expectation. The deep rumbling sound of the Hellcat's aircraft engine, a sound so unique on the battlefield, became the sound of impending death for the German armor. It was a sonic signature of the industrial might and strategic genius of a nation that could take a risk, embrace a new idea, and back it up with overwhelming production. Final summary. The M18 Hellcat remains one of the most potent symbols of World War II military engineering. It was an instrument born of strategic necessity and tactical audacity. It taught the world that in the race for technological superiority, the fastest gun is often the best gun. The fate of the Axis, whether the heavy German armor or the light Japanese tanks, was to learn the hard, cold lesson of the Hellcat. In war, the speed of your conviction must be matched by the velocity of your projectile. The war changed forever, carried on the treads of a machine deemed too fragile to survive, but too fast to ever be truly caught. If the untold stories of strategic paradoxes and the engineers who changed the course of war captivate you, hit the like button on this video. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next deep dive into the hidden histories of the Second World War. We have many more secrets of steel and strategy waiting to be uncovered.